Chapter 10, The Becoming. Life is a lively process of becoming. Douglas MacArthur. The becoming is the third phase of development that every woman has the opportunity to pass through before she begins to see her wings form. The becoming is a continuation of what has been happening on the inside of the cocoon. We will discuss the inner workings of this metamorphosis that is taking place on the inside of the cocoon in the pages ahead. But as for now, rest assured that this hidden season of development is all a part of the grand design. The word become means to be developed into or the converting of something into another thing. The becoming stage of life is all about change. Change begins to show up as deep transformation. Transformation is the altering of something in one state into another state of being. When a woman is going through the process of becoming, she has to let go of the woman that she has become in order to step into the fullness of the woman that she has been created to be. When a woman is entering the becoming stage, life may take on a completely new form and fashion. In many cases, life feels like it has been turned upside down, and everything that was once familiar has turned into unfamiliar. A woman in this stage may have been thrust into a season of feeling stuck and spinning her wheels, but it's for the purpose of remodeling and redesigning a life of intention. Awakening to your authenticity. A woman in the beginning stage of development is no longer afraid to face her greatest fears and disappointments. She is ready to view the woman in the mirror and see what's really going on, as opposed to living in the fantasy of perfection. A woman who is in the becoming stage of development has felt the wooing to pull away from the crowds, to enter a season of seclusion. She needs to be alone with herself and her maker to understand who he created her to be, instead of she has been masquerading around as. She is ready to subdue the fear of loneliness so that she can learn to appreciate alone time and deep reflection. She is beginning to awaken to her authenticity. Her truest identity is being revealed, who she is at her core. She begins to become aware of the masks of self-preservation that she has worn: fear, disappointment, regret, shame, blame, and guilt, morphing into a false version of who she was created to be. These are all symptoms that propel her into a lifestyle of hiding and playing small. But symptoms cannot mask her true purpose. Even if her feelings of desperation and despair, even in her feelings of desperation and despair, there is a sense that nothing she is experiencing is in vain. She can sense the essence of transformation at work down deep in her soul. This is a time when a woman reflects inwardly on herself. I'm not talking about about a selfish, narcissistic, inward focused season. The word selfish means to be preoccupied with oneself and one's own affairs. But the meaning of the word self-love is to regard one's own well-being and happiness. Excessive inward focus is narcissism, but narcissism is nothing more than an overcompensation attempt at an intense lack of self-love. And a narcissist cannot be a narcissist without a codependent counterpart. But that's for another discussion for another day. Taking some time, however, to inwardly reflect on your own well-being lays a sturdy foundation on which to build. This is where I find that most women suffer from severe self-neglect. Women remember when we talk about the instructions of the stewardess on the plane, even though it sounds counterintuitive, She clearly instructs you to put the mask on your first, even if you're sitting next to a small child or someone who needs your help. Wow. The reason behind these instructions is that if you run out of oxygen, you and the person sitting next to you will both lose out. If you put the mask on yourself first, then you will be invigorated and able to help others. When you put the mask on yourself during this season of personal development and take time to breathe, then you will be able to give out of an abundance rather than out of a depleted state. This creates a win win scenario. Women are nurturers by nature. They give and give and give, yet neglect themselves. Women often tell me that they are last on their own list. They report that they do not have time to consider themselves because they're too busy caring for everyone else around them. The problem is that when you do not take time to be replenished or to consider yourself, then you give out of a depleted state and everyone comes out empty. But when you say yes to your hidden time of development and consider the state of your own affairs, then you will be able to sustain the weight of caring for yourself and others while giving from a place of abundance. Forget about it in a New York accent. During the becoming phase, there is a supernatural peace that resides on the inside of this evolving woman that brings a calmness and a trust as she goes through the full process of development. There is a new sense of emotional resilience that is pulsing through her veins. She begins to understand that it is not what happened to her that caused her suffering, but the old story that she tells herself about what happened. She is becoming aware that she can rewrite her story as the hero and mine the diamonds of her past that she had only seen as lumps of coal. She is beginning to recognize that everything she has overcome has laid out was laid out with purposeful design. She is awakening to the realization that her ashes can be repurposed into something beautiful. It is becoming apparent that God is beginning to work all things out together for her good. Romans 8:28 says it perfectly, and we know with great confidence that God, who is deeply concerned about us, causes all things to work together as a plan for good for those who love God and for those who are called according to his plan and purpose. This is a season where uh, she is beginning to embody the following verse, Philippians 3:13. Forgetting what lies behind, I press on toward the goal of the upward call of God at Christ Jesus. Amplified. For anyone who has been victimized or harmed in any way, I am in no way suggesting the idea that you should forget about it and get over it. There are times when being the victim is an appropriate response. If you have been the victim of a crime or abuse, it is important to take the necessary actions to find protection, help, and healing. However, after the recovery from when the victimization has occurred, it is suitable to lay down the label of victim. When you allow what happened to you to label you or to become your identity, then you go from being the victim of what happened to staying the victim in life. It is from this foundation that I'm suggesting that you reframe the events of your past. Uh, might make more Doing this might make you more effective in accomplishing your purpose. There are also times when you tell yourself that you're a victim to something or to someone that has no power over you. You decide that something outside of you has control over you. Whatever you hand your power over to is what you become a victim to. If you retain the power through responsibility, accountability, and owning your contribution, then you remain in control. You are not the victim of your past. You are not powerless over your past. You have influence over your past by choosing the meaning that it has in your life. Here's an example of how I changed the story that I was telling myself about what happened to me. I went through a devastating divorce, financial hardship, betrayal, abandonment. I spent many years anguishing over the events of my past, but when I shifted my perspective about what happened, then I was able to find the beauty from my ashes. I rewrote my story that I was unlovable, not worth keeping, less than, not good enough, not pretty enough, blah, blah, blah. You get the picture. Two, I am worth loving. I deserve to be respected and treated properly. I can be cherished and adored. I own my contribution to the breakdown of my marriage, and I recognize that I had built my identity around a man in the ministry. I had morphed into a false version of who had become, which left me vulnerable to mental and emotional abuse. My resilience laid the foundation for forgiveness, inner healing, and self love, which opened the door for me to now use my story to inspire others toward the same results. Even though I was victimized, I am no longer a victim to the experiences of my life. They do not define me. I went from victim to victor by scripting a new narrative about the events of my life. I was able to do what Paul instructs us to do and forget about the former things so that I could realize a greater purpose out of my pain. You would not be reading this book had I not gone through the devastating events that I had the privilege of experiencing. In order to make that shift, I had to reframe my memories about what happened. Think about this mind bending question: what if your past was not real? What if it was only the memories that you have framed in your mind about what happened? The reason this is such an opportunity for freedom is that your past isn't real. If it's just your perception about what's real, then by shifting your perspective, you can literally change the impact that your past has had on you. Let me explain. About 20 years ago, there was a bank robbery with hostages taken. Thankfully, several hours of being held at gunpoint, the victims were released unharmed. A psychologist contacted all the previous hostages and asked them to write their story while it was fresh on their minds. 10 years later, the psychologist contacted them again and once again asked them to rewrite their story of what happened that day that they had been held hostage. What the psychologist discovered was that the story that had been written the day of the event was nothing like the stories that were written 10 years later. When she handed the stories back to the previous um, victims who had been held at gunpoint, um, when she handed the stories back to them that they had written the day of the event, some of them denied that they had even written that. They insisted that someone had gone and changed their story. With time, the memories of the events of that dreaded day had completely shifted into another story. A memory is not simply an image produced by traveling back in time to the original event. It can be an image that is somewhat distorted because of the prior times that you remembered it, said Donna Bridge, a postdoctoral fellow of Northwestern University in the Feinberg School of Medicine and a lead author. Memories aren't static. If you remember something in the context of a new environment and time, or if you even have a different mood, your memories might integrate new information. This is a technical way to say that your past is not your reality. Your past is a conglomeration of cognitive perception that you attach a certain meaning to. For example, freedom from your past happens when you grant yourself permission to see your story from a fresh perspective. It is the permission to live again, to move forward, and to walk out your purpose with grand design. A few years ago, I was driving back to Austin, Texas from Houston, Texas, and my car broke down on the side of the road. I had my car towed to a nearby town, and later that week, I received a call that my car was repaired and ready to be picked up. My car, however, was about 2 hours away from Houston. I had tried to arrange for a friend to drive me to my car to no avail. My only option was to have my son, Austin, my 19-year-old, take me to my car. My friend loaned me her car so that Austin and I could drive together, and he would drive my car back home, and I would drive my friend's car back home. The plan was working like a well oiled machine. That is, until we arrived at the mechanic's place of business. As we were getting in separate cars, it started pouring rain. To top it off, Austin, my son, who is nearly blind, had left his glasses at work and now had the task of driving my car, visually impaired, in a monsoon like condition, and it was now getting dark. We decided to move forward with our plan. Austin followed close behind me as we both drove like two little old grandmas on a Sunday drive. The stress was mounting minute by minute. We finally made it to our exit where we would be able to get off the interstate and onto the back country roads. Just as I took a big sigh of relief, I looked in my rear view mirror to see a big 18-wheeler behind Austin, who was behind me, and the 18-wheeler was barreling in on us. Being on a two-lane highway, passing conditions were treacherous at best. The truck relentlessly stayed on our tail. I kept looking back in my rearview mirror to make sure that Austin was still in my sight. The pressure of this monstrosity in my rearview mirror was so overwhelming. To make matters worse, the truck was not just in my rearview mirror, but it was in Austin's rearview mirror too. We made it home and all was well. We survived the trip from hell. As I lay in bed that night, recounting the events of the day, I had a huge revelation. That truck was just like my past. It had been barreling in on me, causing me so much stress. It kept my focus in my rearview mirror. But not only was it in hot pursuit of me, it was in hot pursuit of my kids as well. My past had been tormenting me, taunting me with thoughts of fear, loss, and defeat. And all of a sudden, I had an aha moment. I decided to picture that truck laying on its side and me standing on top of it. I thought to myself, it is now time for me to let my past become my platform. I pictured myself standing on top of the very thing that had kept me looking backward for so long. That day, I stepped into true freedom from my past. It is not the specific tragedies, abuses, or even hurtful events that happen to you that cause your long term suffering, but rather the story you tell yourself over the course of your life about what happened to you. It is time to script a new narrative. It is time to mine the diamonds of your past. During this season of the becoming, it is imperative to forget about your past, lay down the old story of fear, disappointment, regret, shame, blame, guilt, and loss that you've been telling yourself, and embrace a new meaning to everything that you've been through. Becoming your own best advocate. It is important at this stage to become the dynamic it is important at this stage to comprehend the dynamic results of keeping your word. As I coach women, one thing I hear often is that women do not trust themselves. If you are not in the habit of keeping your word to yourself, you subconsciously train your brain that your word is not trustworthy. Therefore, when you speak, nothing happens. The more you practice keeping your word and trusting yourself, the more power your words will begin to have. When a woman is smack dab in the middle of the becoming, she begins to comprehend the power of her yes and her no. When you begin to awaken to your authenticity, you can be led by your mission, vision, and purpose rather than driven by the demands of others. You will no longer say yes as a people pleaser, perfectionist, or as a control freak. As you awaken to your authenticity, you will only say yes to the things that are in alignment with who you are at your core and what you want. You will begin to say no without feeling guilty, and you will be able to say no without feeling you will be able to hear no without feeling rejected. One of my clients, whom we will call Becky, told me in one of our coaching sessions that she had a hard time saying no. So she said yes to anything and everything. She was feeling completely exhausted, overwhelmed, and resentful because she felt taken advantage of. As we went through the program, I shared with Becky a very important coaching principle. Your why is always more important than your what. Let me explain let me explain it like this. If you were walking down the street with a young child and you came up to the street light, uh, and you were waiting to cross the street, and you reach over and you shove your child to the ground, are you a mean person? The answer to that question is in the why. If you push the child down for no reason, then yes, you might be considered to be a mean person. However, if you shoved the child to the ground um, because you saw an out of control car heading right for the child, and you shoved the child out of the way of the reckless vehicle, then you might be considered a hero. So your why is more important than your what. Matthew 5:37 in the Amplified says, but let your statements be yes, yes, or no, no. In other words, a firm yes or a firm no. Anything more than that comes from the evil one. When you say yes, but you mean no, or you say no and you mean yes, then you are robbed of the benefits of your good deeds, and you are training your own mind that your words do not carry any weight at all. This concept is crucial in the becoming phase as it prepares you for your queenly authority in the rise. Job 22:28 says, you will decree a thing and it will be established unto you. If you cannot trust yourself to keep your word to yourself, then you will not trust yourself to decree something and see it come to pass. Practicing the art of keeping your word to yourself in this season prepares you for decreeing a thing in the seasons to come. If you've been decreeing things and they're not coming to pass, do an internal audit. Investigate the areas where you may not be keeping your word to yourself. If your subconscious mind is trained that you mean business when you speak, then your declaration will shift your circumstances. I often hear from women that they have trust issues. I would like to boldly say that if you have trust issues, the problem is not that you do not trust other people, but that you do not trust yourself. Trust yourself when you have that gut feeling. Trust yourself to be discerning. Trust yourself to make good decisions. And if it turns out to be a bad decision, then trust yourself to get back on track easily and effortlessly while learning from your mistakes. Allied with yourself and your surroundings. Many women have reported to me that they constantly beat themselves up. They are their own worst enemy. However, during the becoming phase of life, a woman becomes allied with herself and her surroundings. She is beginning to express self love, self compassion, and honoring herself as a creation of God. Not only is she beginning to walk in forgiveness for anyone who has hurt her in her past, she is extending self forgiveness. She is releasing herself from the guilt and shame of whom she was supposed to be or what she thought she was supposed to be. The mistakes and missteps that she has made along the way are forgiven. She extends a new level of grace to herself, and she is now allowing herself to trust her inner nudgings. She is beginning to trust her gut and listen to her intuition, the inner guidance of the Holy Spirit. This is absolutely necessary in preparation for what is to come. You will not be able to withstand the happenings of the debut if you are still carrying the heavy load of blame, shame, and guilt. As you see in the next chapter, everything you've been through has been in preparation for your rise. You can stop apologizing now. Where does the need to apologize for your light inside of you come from? Why do women feel more comfortable diminishing their value than standing in the greatness that God has placed in the vessel that contains the glory of God? In the becoming phase of a woman's journey is when she can stop apologizing for who she is and what she feels called to do. One of my greatest breakthroughs came when I realized that there was nothing wrong with me. My life began to change for the better when I stopped apologizing for my strengths and acting contrite for the big dreams that God had placed inside of me. I recently worked with a woman who was in the habit of diminishing herself. Part of the process that I take women through in coaching is to take a personality test. She studied her strengths and weaknesses, which every woman does at this point of coaching. As she began to peel back the layers of her own nature and temperament, she had some major aha moments about herself, and I could see her confidence stirring inside of her. Recognizing her strengths, she was able to see the value she brought to the world. But as we talked about her weaknesses, she began apologizing for the parts of her personality that she deemed undesirable. So I had her make a list of all of her perceived weaknesses. As she looked over her list, she held her head down low with guilt and shame. I need to fix these weaknesses, she touted. I then instructed her to go down the list of her weaknesses and ask the same question of each one. What's great about this? What's great about this weakness? While it was a struggle at first, she found ways that her weaknesses were a huge blessing to her and her family. She reframed her weaknesses as uniquenesses and that she had brought to the gift as gifts to the world. I do not believe that there is anything wrong with you. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You only need to be more effective. Reframing your weaknesses as unique gifts will help you to stop apologizing, hiding, or playing small. I worked with a young missionary, a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving God and serving others. Throughout our 12 weeks together in coaching, I would ask her the question, what value do you bring to the world? Even in her life of dedication to God, she had grown accustomed to devaluing the magnitude of her surrendered service. She had become completely blinded to her worth, the worth of her selfless devotion to God and to humanity. Somehow she felt it was more spiritual to devalue the work that she did. As time went on, she began to grow more comfortable with stating the value of her gifts and talents. This led to open doors and opportunities that she had no idea that were available to her. This built a new foundation from which she was able to reach more people in less time, all because she stopped apologizing for her selfless acts of service. The word sorry, it means pitiful. When a woman continually says, I'm sorry, she is releasing a self fulfilling prophecy about her own pitiful state. She is declaring, I'm pitiful. You cannot rise into the fullness of whom you were created to be by declaring how pitiful you are. That serves no one. It's time to stop apologizing for the wondrous version of who God created you to be. Even your weaknesses add value to the world. Emotional responsibility. A woman in the middle of the becoming stage is beginning to own a new sense of emotional responsibility as she is released from victimhood. Even if she was victimized in her past, she begins to lay down the victim mask and take responsibilities for her own thoughts, patterns, emotions, and behaviors. She begins to grasp that she can now become her own best advocate. She can practice self care without guilt. She is beginning to affirm herself and no longer looking outside of herself for validation and approval. She is realizing that her voice matters. No longer can she stay small and hidden. No longer can she settle for a life of insignificance. Her time of ignoring the gifts that God has placed in her are over. She was born to soar, and the voice of who she is resounds. It's getting louder as if to silence the voice of who she is turned into. A woman in the beginning stage, a woman in the becoming stage of life is awakening to her divine assignment. The call to impact the world in a bigger way that she has sensed deep within her since she was a little girl is stirring once again. She is beginning to dream again. She is getting comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, stepping out of her comfort zone into a realm of possibility. Even in the midst of this season of isolation, excitement for a life of significance, fulfillment, and true joy is rising up from impossible to actually becoming a possibility. The cultivation that takes place in the becoming is the is a one woman job. This is the road that must be walked alone. This is not a journey that can be taken as a group. Relationships change during this phase. Allowing relationships to change and shift without guilt is essential in this stage of development. Just because someone had access to you in one season of your life does not automatically grant them same access to you as you rise. It is all right to make choices about your relationships that will support you in this new season of metamorphosis. I have heard women say things like, I feel like I'm being a bad friend if I do not sit and let her dump all of her problems on me. I have even heard, I feel so guilty not hanging out with her, even though I'm completely drained after spending time with her. Sister, you are responsible for protecting your energy. If you will concentrate your energies inwardly during this season, you will have more to give in the days ahead. The conservation of your energy is this in this stage is absolutely necessary for the radical transformations that are about to take place. The becoming takes time. It is an inescapable process that must occur. It cannot be cheated. It cannot be skipped over with shortcuts and sidewinders. It is a road paved directly down the middle of death to the old and being resurrected into a more authentic version of who you were created to be. It is a journey into the dark night of your soul, a baptism in brutal self reflection and gut piercing honesty. It takes grit and commitment that not everyone can endure. That is why so many slip back into the previous stage, stuck on the hamster wheel of the ordinary. Not everyone can tolerate this transformational process. And it's no wonder why our subconscious kicks and screams, throwing childlike tantrums. It throws up smoke and mirrors to hoodwink you into avoidance of the metamorphosis that your soul is compelling you to surrender to. Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I remember the becoming stage of my life as if it were yesterday. I had moved to a new city where I knew very few people. I felt secluded and isolated, yet safe and secure. I was tucked away in the confines of my new residence with my new job and no social circle. I felt so alone, yet somehow I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My past was still so prevalent, and the memories of my failures and disappointments still haunted me. The ghosts of my former life seemed to be clinging on to me as if they somehow knew that their days were numbered. Old thoughts of victimization and abandonment screamed in my ear. Old patterns of hiding and being obscure kept me chained to a pole like a baby circus elephant. Fearful thoughts of being unwanted, unlovable, haunted me with evil laughter as if to say, "You will never be loved again. You're not worth being loved or cared for. Your marriage failed and you're a failure." Finally, after a few months of wallowing in self pity, I suited up for battle. I knew it was time to die to my expectations of staying stuck and being happy at the same time. I acquiesced to the becoming. Isaiah 43:18 and 19 says, God says, forget about what happened. Don't keep going over the old history. Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. I'm bursting out. Don't you see it? The message. This season will not last forever. There will come a time when preparation meets the fullness of time, and everything will begin to come together. But as for now, the breakdown is necessary for the breakthrough to take place. Chapter 11, The Metamorphosis. How does one become a butterfly? Pooh asked pensively. You must want to fly so much that you are willing to give up being a caterpillar, Piglet replied. You mean die? Asked Pooh. Yes and no, he answered. What looks like you will die, really you will live on. A. Milne. The breakdown is necessary for the breakthrough. At this point, there is so much going on under the surface, the outer shell of the cocoon. What is unseen far outweighs what is seen. The caterpillar has completely dissolved, and the cells enter a stage of resurgence as they regroup and reform into the shape of something new, a butterfly. The deconstruction of the former is complete, and the caterpillar has dissolved into an unrecognizable, shapeless substance. The breakdown is necessary for the breakthrough. This phase is where noticeable changes are beginning to take place. A reorganization of the cells display themselves as multifaceted eyes, antennae, wings, and longer legs. The becoming involves a metamorphosis that shows up in the form of reformation. Just as I mentioned before, the cocoon is lined with silk. This is a season of grace for a woman who is wrapped up in the middle of transformation. There is a softness within the dark, lonely place of confinement that makes an uncomfortable place as comfortable as possible. Self-compassion is absolutely necessary in the middle of the metamorphosis. What's really going on in there? Once the collapse of the cocoon, once the collapse of the caterpillar is complete, the new cells come together as a butterfly. As for you, when you're in the cocoon, after the breakdown, after you face your old mindsets, saying yes to the season of lonely reflection, this is where you step into the reformation of who you were always meant to be. The real you begins to take shape. The metamorphosis that is taking place in the becoming is a process of identity development. It is an identity makeover, so to speak. This is where you discover your mission, vision, purpose, values, passions, potential. Just like the butterfly, you're going through a process of resurgence, a divine renaissance, if you will. During the metamorphosis of the becoming phase, you are literally being reinvented. However, you're not trying to become someone that you're not, but rather you're releasing who you were so that you can be the most authentic version of who you are, upside down and inside out. The cocoon hangs upside down during this metamorphosis process. If you feel like life has been turned upside down, that's great. You are perfectly positioned for metamorphosis to take place. Hanging upside down, the cocoon is positioned in such a way that allows nature to defy gravity. Proper placement is imperative during this phase of the becoming. This upside down vantage point shifts your perspective so that you can see things that you may have been unwilling to look at before. You see things are from a completely new viewpoint. Remember that the cocoon is a dark, lonely place. It is an inside job that will eventually produce outward results, but not before the full process of transformation has taken place. Everything you ate as a fuzzy little hungry caterpillar is now being used as fuel for your transformation. Enzymes are released inside the cocoon that break down the former structure of the caterpillar into her what they call pupa soup. The foundations that you have built your life on become null and void. I remember the season of my life well. I had built my entire identity around a man and the ministry. When both of those had disintegrated into nothingness, I suffered from an intense identity crisis. I had built an identity around what I did versus who I am at my core. Just like the little caterpillar alone in the cocoon, I felt like I was going to drown in the pool of my own tears. Little did I know that I was right on track. What I could not see at the time was that I was not going to drown in my sorrows. The life that I had created had been liquefied so that it could melt away. My old life had to be dissolved so that the master creator could reshape me into a more effective vessel. All that's left after the breakdown are what's called imaginal discs inside of the cocoon, also called sleeping cells. The imaginal discs are the building blocks for the reformation to begin. They are a highly organized group of cells that survive the digestive process and form into adult body parts. Everything that the caterpillar needed to become the butterfly was already within her. 2 Peter 1:3 says, "For his divine power has bestowed on us absolutely everything necessary for a dynamic spiritual life and godliness through true and personal knowledge of him who has called us by his own glory and excellence." Amplified. Just like your butterfly sister, you have everything that you need housed in the container of your human form. You have all the love that you need. You're not missing anything. You do not need more love, more joy, or more peace. You have everything you need for a dynamic spiritual life. This concept is foreign to some because you may have been taught that you need something else from outside of yourself for happiness, but that comes from a perspective of lack. You embody abundance. Everything you need is inside of you. During the metamorphosis of the becoming, your eyes are being reformed with new lenses that will give you the ability to see further than you've ever have been able to see as a caterpillar. Your legs are being fashioned with the ability to run faster and cover more ground in less time. Just like the butterfly gains new wings with the cocoon, within the cocoon, you are given a new mode of transportation that will carry you higher than you've ever been before. Newly fashioned antennae round out the additions accumulated in the cocoon. The butterfly uses her antenna to get a new sense of what's going on around her during this season. You will be gifted with a new intuitive instinctiveness that will help you navigate the upcoming seasons of your life. Guess what? You no longer will be gullible. You will begin to trust yourself in the leading of the Holy Spirit in a whole new way. You will be able to stand validated, no longer needing permission from outside of you in order to soar. People around you may not be able to see all the changes that are happening in the secret place, but you will know something is happening. Just like a mighty oak tree who starts off as an acorn, you you will be just like a deciduous tree who loses all signs of life during the winter season. Yet in the dark, cold environment of winter, it's when what's inside of the mighty oak is preparing to come forth. If you're in the middle of this metamorphosis, you may feel discombobulated, disassociated, and disadvantaged, but it's all part of the process. You're feeling, while feeling out of sorts is totally normal, this season of separation will lead to new supportive like-minded associations. The season of solitude and isolation is necessary to prepare for your new relationships that will be collaborative by nature. It is best not to share with too many people about what's going on or when you're in the cocoon. Those who are stuck in their caterpillar state will not have the foresight to recognize what's happening. I remember being so frustrated trying to convince other caterpillars that I was almost a butterfly. Caterpillars will try to woo you back to the safety of staying small and hidden. They will say things like, "Don't dream too big. What if it doesn't happen?" However, there will be some individuals in your life that can distinguish where you currently are and where you're headed. In other words, fellow butterflies will see your butterfly even when you're not fully developed yet. Not only will they see the essence of your butterfly, but they will speak to you like the butterfly that you are. Relationships may shift in this season. You cannot expect a caterpillar to see things from a butterfly's perspective. There's no judgment attached to the caterpillar perspective. She will see things differently one day. But during this phase of transition, sometimes you have to break away from the old crowd of caterpillars and make friends with some butterflies without guilt. I'm not a proponent of discarding relationships, but sometimes they take on a new dynamic, and there should be no guilt in that. As your caterpillar friends see you develop with your wings, you will inspire them to go through their full process of development in their cocoon so that they too can soar one day. Remember what I said earlier, just because someone has access to you in one season of your life does not guarantee them access to you in every season of your life. Face to face with all of your own crap. Excuse my language here. While the caterpillar is wrapped up in the borders of this cocoon, she cannot excrete. She is stuck in the cocoon with all of her feces. While this is kind of gross, when you are in the season of metamorphosis and deep transformation, it's completely normal that you come face to face with all your own crap. When you're in the cave of the cocoon, the metamorphosis is the vehicle of becoming. You cannot get rid of the parts of yourself that keep you stuck and spinning your wheels. You come face to face with all your fears, failures, and insecurities, and your self imposed limitations. The shame and guilt and disappointment of the past rears its ugly head once again. It is a season where self doubt surfaces and your confidence wanes. But if you will go through this full process of development and stay in the cocoon of personal transformation, something incredible will happen in the seasons to come. Instead of running from the parts of yourself that you've deemed undesirable and try to eliminate the waste of your imperfections, this is an opportunity for you to sit with them and incorporate them into your unique individuality. You may come in direct contact with buried anger, resentment, insecurities, fears, and self doubt. Negative emotions can surface that you thought you'd already dealt with in this season. If you do not understand what's happening, you might think you're going backwards, but you're not. You're in the right place at the right time. Synchronicity is at work. Peer directly into the hollow eyes of your fears. Look at your anger, resentment, bitterness dead in the face. Sit with them, feel the pain, And as you stay face to face with the surge of negative emotions that surface and embrace the anguish that they become, you will master them and you will see that in the chapters to come, they will serve you. No longer will they be your master. They will benefit you in the days ahead. The word authenticity means to be whole. Integrating what you have been hiding from will produce a level of wholeness that will be the strength for you to soar in the days to come. Soon it will all make sense. Your best strategy to make it through this season is to stay put. Don't try and run from it. There's a saying that I use in coaching: what you resist persists. Trust me when I tell you, you do not want to stay in the cocoon any longer than necessary. Remember what the Borg said in Star Trek: The Next Generation? Resistance is futile. Just go with it. Even if you feel stagnant and stuck, don't worry. Change is happening. Soon you will see the results of the supernatural shifts that are taking place inside of you. James chapter 1, verse 4 says, "Let patience have her perfect work in you, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." Chapter 12, the comeback. Your setback is a setup for your comeback. P.D. Jakes. All of the setbacks you have endured, all the days in solitude in the cocoon, face to face with your fears, insecurities, and self doubt, all the digging deep to discover who you are at your core, has served a greater purpose. It's all been part of the process to get you to this point right here. Transitioning through setback so that you can come back stronger than ever before is what it's all about. This is a unique time in a butterfly's life and a woman who is on the rise. If you do not understand what's happening, confusion can set in and you get sucked back into the negative cycle of frustration and discouragement. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know with great confidence that God, who is deeply concerned about us, causes all things to work together as a plan for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose." Amplified. You are in a process of becoming a fully formed butterfly. Your wings are almost complete, and you've gotten almost all the components that are necessary for functioning at a higher level. However, you're still constrained within the confines of your metamorphosis. You're still stuck in the cocoon. The comeback is a transitory period between the becoming and the debut. This is a season of renewed hope. This is a season of redefining, redesigning. Dreams are reawakened. The call is beginning to be stirred. A woman who is preparing for her comeback has made peace with her setbacks. She is realizing that where she once saw defeat, there are actually possibilities and options available to her that she hadn't noticed before. As you've been following through the journey of Esther, you will see that she too went through a cocoon season and experienced a metamorphosis. Her transformation was preparation for the king's presence. Let us not forget that Esther, previously named Hadassah, an orphan girl who had suffered great loss and tragedy, her personal transformation was more than just physical. She had to begin to see herself from a new perspective that carried with it the possibility of royalty. Formerly an orphaned, Formerly orphaned, Esther may have felt abandoned or deprived by the loss of her parents. She may not have had an inheritance left to her, which could have left her feeling lacking or less than the other girls that she had grown up around. She was dragged away to a lonely, unfamiliar place of preparation. She was placed in a harem with other girls her age from different parts of the kingdom. While in the harem, I can only imagine how she must have felt. Her only hope was to re-script the narrative that she had been telling herself about what happened. She had to shift her mindset from abandoned to available. She could have felt sorry for herself, or she could have seen her situation as an advantage. As Esther had nothing to return to, which made it easier for her to abandon herself, commit fully to the process of development to becoming queen. Her setback had perfectly positioned her for her comeback. Esther chapter 2, 12 through 15 says, Now, when it was each young woman's turn to go before King Ahasuerus after the end of 12 months, under the regulations for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with sweet spices and perfumes, and the beauty preparations for women. Then the young women would go before the king in this way. Anything that she wanted was given to her to take with her into the harem, into the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in, and the next morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Now, as for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her in as his own daughter, when her turn came to go into the king, she requested nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, an attendant, and who was in charge of the women, had advised. And Esther found favor in the sight of all who saw her. Esther was whisked away into a hidden place of development, ripped away from her family and life as she knew it. She was in hiding, keeping her identity veiled to those around her, lest she be mistreated because of her nationality. She was in a lonely place of preparation. For 6 months, she was prepared with oil and myrrh. For 6 months, sweet spices and perfumes, as well as beauty preparations. The season of preparation was aided by the king's eunuch Haggai. A eunuch was literally a bed attendant. This position was only given to those whose sexual organs had been mutilated or castrated. This was a guarantee that they were safe to care for the harem without sexually assaulting them. The name Haggai means separation. During your preparation for your comeback, you will be surrounded by people who are safe to be around during your season of separation. I found this to be true in my own life. As I was in preparation for my comeback, I stand in awe at the supportive people that I was surrounded with, people who did not have an ulterior motive. They truly cared for me in my season of separation. The oil of myrrh was a healing salve used to heal outward wounds. Myrrh was a resin extracted out of a small thorny tree species. It's interesting to me that once again we see something with healing properties that originated from something that is thorny and prickly. Just like your story, he can turn your ashes into beauty. He can use the painful parts of our lives to bring healing to others. Myrrh was also thought of to be anti-inflammatory and antifungal. It was esteemed for its purifying power. Esther was prepared for 6 months with an intense detoxification process. Your journey through the metamorphosis of the becoming will also take you through a process of detoxification, ridding your mind of toxic thoughts, patterns, and beliefs that keep you thinking like an orphan. The process of beautification was a 4-step process: purification, renewal, healing, and cleansing. With this story taking place in the desert and subtropical climate, the women of the harem would probably have had scars and wounds from intense sandstorms. These women would have been coming from all over the kingdom, so the first 6 months were for purification to make sure she didn't have any diseases, and the second 6 months was for her beautification. The beautification process took these women on a journey of healing from the inside out. Your comeback is a season of preparation. Just like Esther, the process of preparing you for your comeback is marked by healing from the inside out, purification, renewal, healing, and cleansing. Not one part of the process can be skipped. Royalty demands authenticity. It is worth speculating that the previous Queen Vashti may have jumped over a step in the process of preparation. These young women that were brought into the harem were not born into royalty. They were chosen and then prepared for the possibility of a royal title. What are you preparing for? Restoration, recompense, and reward. If you remember, a caterpillar experiences loss when she goes into the cocoon. She loses up to half her weight when she enters into her time of development. But as she morphs into who she was created to be, she starts adding that weight back on. You may have experienced loss, but the loss made room for more. Your setback cleared a way for the comeback that you're headed for. In August of 2017, Houston experienced one of the worst floods that the nation had ever seen. Floods can be devastating and damaging, but I remember watching a documentary about the benefits of the flood. While they do bring destruction, they also have a way of clearing a path for new growth. I would think that a tractor and a mower would suffice, but nevertheless, there are payoffs to the environment. My point is this, that loss prepares the way for preparation, and preparation lays the foundation for rebuilding. The caterpillar experiences loss as she goes into the cocoon. Our queenly example, Esther, suffered loss, the loss of her family, as she went into the harem for preparation. That loss experienced in your setback is what prepares you for your comeback. Loss does not equal failure. Many of the women that I work with have reported that the loss they have suffered feels like failure. They often wince at the thought of putting themselves out there for the fear of failure. Women often tell me that they are afraid to fail, but I believe quite the opposite is true. Women fear success. Women are afraid of their own success more than they are afraid to fail. Women are very comfortable with failing. I believe that failure feels safer than succeeding. Many times, failure feels like a nice, cozy, as cozy as a pair of your old sweatpants. It becomes an easy way out, a scapegoat to which you can shift all the blame. Women are inundated with subconscious beliefs that hauntingly whisper to them, "You're not good enough." Self-sabotage leads to failure, and failure confirms that whispered lie. If you succeed, then you will have to be visible. You will have to stand in the responsibility and authority that comes with your newly appointed position. One of my favorite business quotes is, "The good news is you're the boss. The bad news is you're the boss." The buck stops with the butterfly, not the cocoon. Your comeback requires a new mindset, a mindset that feels the fear of success and failure, but does it anyway. You must find the treasure in your past successes and failures in order to prepare you for the crown. Your comeback is encompassed in the acceptance of your setback and the willingness to surrender to the journey between them.